Next up, we're going to look at solving equations that have fractions in them. And just like before, I'm going to show you two methods. And the first method, just like before, is to solve as normal. But again, I caution you, just proceed very carefully with this. And I just want to remind you before we get going that to find a common denominator when you're adding and subtracting fractions, right? That process of finding a lowest common denominator, an LCD we sometimes call it, that's important when we solve equations with fractions. Okay, so for this first example, we've got 4/3 equals negative 6w minus 5/3. Ooh, okay. Just like before, our goal is to get w by itself. In this case, the variable is w. So we're going to want to get rid of the minus 5/3 over on the right-hand side. And so to do that, again, just like before, we're going to add 5/3 to both sides. So I'm just going to rewrite the equation. Minus 6w minus 5/3, but we're going to add 5/3. Oh, I'll do it in a different color so we can see it. We're going to add 5/3 to the right-hand side, and on the left we're going to add 5/3 as well. So we're going to go plus 5/3. Now look on the right-hand side, and those two are going to cancel one another out, minus 5/3 plus 5/3. And it leaves us just with negative 6w on the right. Now on the left, when you combine 4/3 and 5/3, remember you're adding two fractions, so you're just adding the numerators, and you're going to add them to get 9/3. 5 plus 4 is 9. Now that simplifies. You can hopefully see that 9/3 is the same as saying 3. So it's the same as saying 3 equals negative 6w. And just like before, now, look at that, we've no longer have any fractions, but just like before, we'll divide both sides by the negative 6. I'll do that in blue. Do that to both sides. Whoop. And on the right-hand side, those two negative 6's cancel out, leaves us just with a w. And on the left, 3 divided by negative 6. Well, that just, just kind of zoom out on that for a second. That's a fraction, 3/6. Well, that's really just the same as 1/2. But there is a negative there, so that means it's going to be equal to negative 1/2. And I always want to point this out to people. There's a few different ways we can write this, and I'll just use this space over here. You can write your negative out in front, like I did down below. That's perfectly fine. You could also choose to write it on the numerator, or you could choose to write it on the denominator. And if this last one here might have been the tempting way to write it because the negative was on the denominator of our fraction over there. Any of these three are perfectly acceptable. Most times in most textbooks and a lot of the workbook that you're working through, you'll see it written this way here. So, but I just want to inform you that those three are all the exact same. Now, what you can't do, what is not equal to those three, is -1 divided by -2, right? There, it's a negative divided by a negative. Well, that just gives you a positive, right? When you divide a negative by a negative, back to our old rules, that gives you positive 1/2. So as long as you don't put the negative twice, you're safe. But on the numerator, on the denominator, or right in front of the whole thing, all of those are perfectly acceptable. All right, so you may have noticed in that last example, we didn't actually have to seek out and find a common denominator. It was provided for us. In this example, it's not the case, so it's a little bit trickier. But it's approached just the same way, right? As a lot of our equations, we're going to try to get x by itself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this minus 1/3 x over to the other side by adding 1/3 x to both sides. So let's do that first. Just rewriting it, and then we're going to add 1/3 x to the left side. And on the right, we're going to do the same thing. And maybe I'll put my x's together here. So I'll add my 1/3 x over here first. It's nice to see them together. You can rewrite them and rearrange them as long as you're careful with the signs. Okay, so we've added it to both sides, and, well, the nice thing at least is on the left, we don't really even have to find a common denominator. We know those two cancel out, and it just leaves us with our 20. On the right, we have to find a common denominator now. We have a half x and a third x. So between 2 and 3, our common denominator is going to be 6. So our 1/2 becomes 3/6 x, and our 1/3 becomes 2/6 x. And if you need a brushing up on how to get there, I recommend looking back at our videos on adding fractions, finding a common denominator. We multiplied both things, both numerator and denominator, by 2 over here, and we multiplied both numerator and denominator, by 3 on here, and by 2 over here to get those in common. And now we can go ahead and add. We'll write our 20 first. And 3x plus 2x is 5x, so it becomes 5 over 6x plus 5. And now we continue getting x by itself. It's a little gross looking there, but we'll just subtract 5 from both sides. And on the left, it'll leave us with 15. On the right, those two cancel one another out, so it just leaves us with 5 over 6x. Now, at this point here, if that was like, let's just say that was 15 equals 3x, right? What would your step be? Well, it would be to divide both sides by 3. And so we're going to kind of approach it the same way here. We're going to take this, and both sides we're going to divide by 5/6. Now, this looks disgusting, especially on the right-hand side, but it's also going to look a little gross on the left. But the nice thing about the right-hand side of this equation is those two cancel out just like anything. If you divide anything by itself, you're just going to be left with 1. So it leaves us just with that x over there. Now on the left, I'm just going to write this out a little bit. Maybe I'll write it out over here. 15 over 5 over 6. Well, let's instead think of this fraction sign right here as a division sign. So that would really be the same as saying 15 divided by 5 over 6. So that's what a fraction really is, right? It's a division. So now we're 15 divided by 5 over 6. How do you divide fractions again? Oh, right, you multiply by the reciprocal. So we take this and we flip it. 5 over 6 becomes 6 over 5. And now we just multiply numerator by numerator, and I'll put this over 1, denominator by denominator. 15 times 6, squeeze it in here, is 90, and 1 times 5 is 5. 90 over 5 is 18, so x equals 18. So I understand if you don't like this way, I'm going to show you a way, method 2, coming up here shortly, that's hopefully going to alleviate a lot of this fraction stress that's going on here. So we'll see you there.